Olivia barely had time to understand what she was hearing before her 9-year-old son let out a scream that silenced the entire birthday party. "Mom, my hands are burning, please help me." The brightly wrapped gift tumbled from his lap onto the living room floor. His small hands turned red almost instantly as he frantically shook them, tears pouring down his face. "What happened?" Olivia shouted, dropping the paper plates she had been carrying. I don't know," he cried. "It burns." Daniel lunged across the room, grabbed their son, and rushed him toward the kitchen sink while Olivia turned on the cold water with trembling hands. "Keep his hands under the water," she yelled. Around them, the cheerful sounds of children laughing disappeared. Parents stood frozen. Balloons floated silently against the ceiling. Only one person wasn't moving. Richard. Olivia's father-in-law stood beside the birthday table, calmly watching everything unfold. "It must be some harmless reaction," he said evenly. "Don't panic." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "Our son is screaming in pain." Daniel didn't wait for another second. He wrapped a towel around their son's dripping arms, scooped him into the car, and sped toward the emergency room. The birthday party was over. No cake. No presents. Only terrified silence. Olivia looked down at the gift, lying on the floor. The science kit Richard had proudly insisted his grandson open, first, now sat partially spilled across the carpet. Something deep inside her whispered that this wasn't simply bad luck. She just didn't know how right that feeling would prove to be. The emergency room moved quickly. Doctors flushed the chemicals from her son's hands, while nurses asked question after question. What exactly did he touch? Was there any cleaning product nearby? Did anyone see what came out of the box? Olivia could only shake her head. It was a birthday present from his grandfather. After examining the burns, the physician returned with a serious expression. "These aren't consistent with an allergic reaction," he said. "Your son was exposed to a chemical irritant." Olivia felt her stomach drop. "A chemical?" "Yes, we'll run additional tests, but whatever was inside that package shouldn't have been anywhere near a child." Meanwhile, Richard repeatedly called Daniel's phone. When Daniel finally answered, his father didn't ask about his grandson. Instead, he said, "Don't let anyone overreact. These things happen. There's no need to involve the police." Daniel frowned. "Dad, why would you even say that?" Richard hesitated for a split second. "I'm just saying accidents happen." Then he ended the call. Hours later, after doctors confirmed the burns would heal with treatment, Daniel drove home. Olivia rushed to the front door the moment she heard the car. She expected to see only her exhausted husband. Instead, 2 uniformed police officers stepped out behind him. One carried the brightly wrapped birthday present inside a sealed evidence bag. The older detective removed his notebook and looked directly at Olivia. "Mrs. Carter," he said quietly, "we'd like everyone to tell us exactly who handled this gift before your son opened it." Richard's car remained parked outside long after the detectives finished collecting the first round of statements. He never came to the door. He never asked whether his grandson was recovering. Instead, he sat behind the steering wheel, staring toward the house as if he were waiting for something. Olivia noticed it through the living room window. "He's still there," she whispered. Daniel looked outside, rubbing his exhausted face. "I'll talk to him." "No," Olivia stopped him. "Not yet." A detective stepped between them. "We'd prefer everyone stay inside until we're finished." The officer's calm tone made the situation feel even more serious. One by one, every adult who had attended the birthday party described exactly what they had seen. Who brought the present into the house? Who opened it? Did anyone touch the contents before your son? Olivia answered every question carefully, but as she spoke, small details she hadn't considered earlier suddenly began fitting together. Richard had arrived nearly 30 minutes before everyone else. When Olivia offered to place all the presents together on the gift table, he had politely refused. "I'll hold on to this one," he'd said with a smile. "It's special." She remembered laughing at the time. Now the memory made her uneasy. Another detail surfaced. When the children wanted to open gifts after eating cake, Richard had interrupted. "No," he'd insisted. "I'd really like him to open Grandpa's present first." Everyone had assumed he was simply excited. Nobody questioned it. Then came the moment she couldn't stop replaying. After handing the box to her son, Richard hadn't sat down. He stood watching. Not smiling. Not celebrating. Watching. Almost waiting. The lead detective looked up from his notes. "Mrs. Carter, was your father-in-law ever out of sight with the gift?" Olivia swallowed. He wouldn't let anyone else handle it. Across the room, Daniel lowered his head. "I remember asking if I should unwrap it for him. He said no." The detective quietly wrote another line. Just then Daniel's phone rang again. "Dad." He hesitated before answering. "What?" Richard didn't bother with greetings. "You need to stop talking to those officers. They're just asking questions. They're making this into something it isn't." Daniel's voice hardened. "My son has chemical burns." "I know, and I'm telling you this is getting out of control." Olivia could hear Richard's voice through the speaker. "People are going to destroy this family if you keep cooperating." Daniel stared silently at the floor. "Dad, have you even asked how he's doing?" There was a long pause. Instead of answering, Richard asked a different question. "Did the hospital keep the gift?" Daniel frowned. "What?" "The present. Did they keep it?" "Why does that matter?" Another pause. "It just does." The line went dead. The detective had heard enough. He quietly asked Daniel for the phone before turning toward another officer. "Trace that call." The room became silent. An hour later, another investigator returned carrying a sealed laboratory envelope. "We've completed the preliminary screening." Everyone stood. The chemical wasn't introduced during manufacturing. Olivia felt every muscle tighten. It was placed inside the package after the science kit left the factory. Daniel looked stunned. So someone had access to the gift before it reached your son." Nobody spoke. The list of possible people was painfully short. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. "I can't believe we're even thinking this." Olivia stepped closer. "I'm not accusing anyone. But someone did this. And your father was the only person who never let that gift out of his hands." Daniel wanted to argue. She could see it. But the words never came. A loud knock suddenly echoed through the house. Every head turned toward the front door. Another knock. Harder this time. One detective slowly opened it. Richard stood on the porch. His expression was colder than Olivia had ever seen. Ignoring the officers, he fixed his eyes on Daniel. "You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into." The following morning, flashing blue lights reflected across Richard's quiet suburban street. Neighbors stepped onto their porches, whispering as two unmarked police vehicles pulled into his driveway. Olivia stood beside Daniel across the street with Detective Harris. "No one speaks unless we ask you to," Harris instructed. Richard opened his front door before officers could knock. "What is all this?" he demanded loudly. Detective Harris handed him a warrant. "We're conducting a lawful search of the property in connection with yesterday's incident." Richard glanced at the document, then laughed. "You're treating a grandfather like a criminal because of a defective toy. We'll determine exactly what happened." Word spread quickly through the family. Within minutes, Olivia's phone exploded with calls. She ignored the first few. Then her sister-in-law, Melissa, left a voicemail. "How could you do this to Dad? He's 70 years old. You're humiliating him over an accident. Another message followed. You've destroyed this family. Then another. You should be ashamed. By lunchtime, several cousins had already posted online that Richard was being falsely accused. Some even claimed Olivia had exaggerated her son's injuries to get attention. She stared at the screen in disbelief. My son is the one in bandages, she whispered. And somehow I'm the villain. Daniel quietly took the phone from her. You don't have to read any more. Across the street, investigators carried several sealed boxes out of Richard's garage. One officer approached Detective Harris. We found residue. Harris nodded. The same chemical. We're sending it to the lab, but it appears consistent. Richard immediately interrupted. I taught chemistry for 40 years. Those are old teaching materials. They've been sitting in my garage forever. Another investigator shook his head. The containers have manufacturing dates from last year. Richard's confident expression flickered for the first time. Detective Harris noticed. So these aren't decades old. Richard folded his arms. I must have forgotten. Forgotten. Olivia watched his face carefully. Yesterday, he had insisted everything was an accident. Today, he couldn't explain why the same chemical was sitting in his garage. Hours later, Daniel was called aside by Detective Harris. I need to ask you something privately. Olivia waited near the patrol car until Daniel returned. His face had gone pale. What is it? She asked. He looked down before answering. I haven't told you everything. Her stomach tightened. What do you mean? For the past 4 months. He took a slow breath. I've been helping investigators review financial records connected to my father's former employer. Olivia stared at him. You were part of an investigation. I couldn't tell anyone. Not even me. They asked me not to. Detective Harris stepped closer. We believe Mr. Carter may have been diverting industrial materials through shell companies. Olivia suddenly remembered Richard's desperate phone call. Don't cooperate. Don't involve the police. The words no longer sounded like panic. They sounded like fear. Meanwhile, officers searching Richard's home discovered a garbage bag stuffed with shredded business documents. A forensic technician carefully collected every piece. Richard protested loudly. Those are personal papers. We'll determine that, Harris replied. By evening, the extended family had gathered outside the property. Several relatives openly confronted Olivia. You owe Richard an apology. You're letting police ruin an innocent man's life. Daniel stepped between them. No. Everyone fell silent. My son nearly lost the use of his hands. If the investigation clears my father, I'll accept that. But until then. He turned toward Olivia and took her hand. I'm standing with my wife. For the first time since the nightmare began, Olivia wasn't standing alone. Officers escorted Richard toward a police vehicle for further questioning. Before getting inside, he turned to Daniel. His expression was calm, almost disappointed. You just destroyed your own family. The car door slammed shut. The shredded documents covered nearly an entire evidence table. For 2 days, forensic specialists worked piece by piece, matching torn edges and reconstructing invoices that Richard had clearly intended to destroy. Detective Harris finally invited Olivia and Daniel to the station. We've made significant progress. He spread several reconstructed pages across the conference table. These invoices belong to shipments of industrial chemical crystals reported missing from Westlake Scientific almost 8 months ago. Daniel leaned forward. My father consulted for them after retirement. Exactly. Harris tapped another document. Every shipment listed here disappeared before reaching its destination. Olivia stared at the company logo. So the chemicals that hurt our son may have come from these missing shipments. Before anyone could speak further, another detective entered carrying a laboratory report. The hospital confirmed it. He handed the report to Harris. The substance found on your son's hands is chemically identical to the material listed on those invoices. The room fell silent. Daniel slowly sat back. My God. At the hospital, specialists explained that had Olivia delayed flushing the chemicals from her son's hands by only a few more minutes, the burns could have been much worse. Olivia looked through the observation window, where her son carefully flexed his bandaged fingers during therapy. He smiled when he saw her. I'm getting better, Mom. She smiled back. But inside, she couldn't stop wondering how someone who called himself Grandpa could have allowed this to happen. That evening, Detective Harris requested access to neighborhood security cameras. One by one, investigators reviewed footage from houses surrounding Richard's property. Hours passed. Finally, one technician paused the video. There, Richard's SUV pulled into his driveway early on the morning of the birthday party. Instead of entering his house, he carried the wrapped present into his detached workshop. He was inside for 17 minutes, the technician noted. The next camera showed him leaving with the exact same wrapped box before driving directly to Daniel and Olivia's home. Detective Harris folded his arms. He never stopped anywhere else. Olivia watched the footage over and over. Whatever had happened, it happened inside that workshop. Later that night, she sat beside her son's bed. He quietly asked, Mom. Yes, sweetheart. I wanted Grandpa to be proud of me. Olivia looked at him. You remember? He nodded. I told him I wanted to become a scientist like him. Her throat tightened. He smiled. And then he said he'd bring me something special. Olivia closed her eyes. The memory suddenly became unbearable. The very dream Richard had encouraged had become the weapon he used against his own grandson. The following morning, Daniel received another call from Detective Harris. We uncovered something else. Daniel placed the phone on speaker. Richard learned 3 weeks ago that prosecutors were preparing criminal charges connected to the missing chemicals. Olivia looked at him. So he knew. He knew the investigation was closing in. And you, Harris continued, were one of the witnesses providing financial records. Daniel slowly understood. He wasn't trying to hurt our son because of our son. He was trying to scare me. Harris nodded. We believe the birthday gift was intended as intimidation. If you withdrew your cooperation, the investigation might collapse. Even with mounting evidence, Richard's attorney appeared before reporters later that afternoon. My client is heartbroken. This was a tragic accident involving a defective science kit. No evidence suggests intentional wrongdoing. But inside the forensic laboratory, one final examination was still underway. Experts were determining whether the chemical container had been deliberately hidden inside the science kit before it was gift-wrapped. That single report would decide whether prosecutors pursued negligence or attempted assault. The next afternoon, Olivia and Daniel waited outside the courthouse with Detective Harris. No one spoke. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, another investigator hurried across the lobby, carrying a sealed laboratory envelope. He handed it to Harris. The detective opened the report. He read silently. Then he slowly lifted his eyes toward Olivia and Daniel. His expression had completely changed. This changes everything. Following conclusions strictly follows the uploaded outline. The courtroom was so quiet that Olivia could hear the rustle of Detective Harris unfolding the final laboratory report. He read the first page without speaking. Then he looked directly at Daniel. The forensic analysis is conclusive. Daniel held Olivia's hand tighter. The chemical container wasn't part of the science kit. Harris slid several enlarged photographs across the table. The original packaging had been carefully opened. He pointed to tiny cuts hidden beneath the factory seal. Someone removed part of the contents, inserted a separate plastic vial containing the industrial chemical crystals, then resealed the box. Olivia stared at the photographs. It wasn't an accident. No. Harris placed another document beside them. We also recovered fingerprints. He paused. The concealed chemical container carried only one complete set. Daniel already knew the answer before the detective spoke. My father's. Harris nodded. There were no manufacturing fingerprints, no store employee prints, only Richard's. Moments later, prosecutors presented the rest of their evidence. Investigators had recovered deleted emails from Richard's computer showing months of illegal sales involving hazardous industrial chemicals stolen from his former employer. Financial records traced payments into hidden accounts he controlled. More importantly, several emails revealed his growing panic after learning investigators had begun closing in on the theft operation. One message stood out above the rest. If Daniel keeps cooperating, everything falls apart. Another read. I need him to understand what's at stake. The courtroom fell silent. The birthday gift had never been about celebrating a grandson. It had been a warning. Richard believed that frightening Daniel through his own child would force him to stop helping investigators before criminal charges were filed. Instead, he had handed prosecutors the strongest piece of evidence against himself. Olivia lowered her head as the truth settled over her. For weeks, she had searched for some explanation that would allow her to believe there had been a terrible mistake. There wasn't one. The man her son had trusted most had deliberately turned that trust into a weapon. Daniel covered his face with both hands. I should have listened to you from the beginning. Olivia gently squeezed his shoulder. You wanted to believe your father. I did. And I almost let that blind me. Later that evening, they visited their son, whose hands were still wrapped in fresh bandages. He looked up as they entered. Did they find out what happened? Daniel knelt beside the bed. They did. The little boy hesitated before asking the question neither parent wanted to hear. Why would Grandpa want to hurt me? Neither of them answered immediately. Finally, Olivia brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. You didn't do anything wrong. This was never your fault. He nodded quietly, though the confusion remained in his eyes. Richard was formally charged with aggravated assault on a child endangerment, evidence tampering, theft of hazardous materials, and multiple environmental crimes connected to the stolen chemicals. His former employer filed civil lawsuits seeking millions in damages. The evidence was overwhelming. Faced with surveillance footage, fingerprints, laboratory findings, reconstructed invoices, financial records, and recovered emails, Richard eventually accepted a plea agreement rather than face a lengthy trial. News of the case spread quickly. The same relatives who had accused Olivia of destroying the family began calling one after another. Melissa spoke first. I'm sorry. I should never have blamed you. Other cousins admitted they had defended Richard simply because he had always controlled the family, and they had never imagined he was capable of something so cruel. Olivia accepted their apologies, but she no longer felt responsible for keeping everyone comfortable. Some relationships slowly healed. Others ended forever. Daniel made the hardest decision of his life. After the sentencing hearing, he quietly removed every remaining photograph of Richard from their home. There isn't any relationship left to save, he told Olivia. My responsibility is here. He looked toward their son. With my family. For the first time since the birthday party. Olivia felt the weight she'd been carrying begin to lift. Months passed. Physical therapy helped their son regain full movement in both hands. The burns healed remarkably well, though faint scars remained across his palms. Instead of becoming afraid of science, he surprised everyone. One afternoon, he sat at the kitchen table, assembling a beginner robotics kit. Olivia smiled. "You still like building things?" He grinned. "I do. But this time, you'll help me." She laughed softly. "I wouldn't miss it." The following year, his 10th birthday was celebrated quietly at home. No large crowd. No unnecessary attention. Only the people who had stood beside them when everything fell apart. As he blew out the candles, Olivia watched her son smile without fear for the first time in a long while. She realized that protecting her family had cost her the illusion of peace, but it had given them something far more valuable. The greatest gift she could ever give her son wasn't another birthday present. It was making sure the person who betrayed his trust would never have the chance to hurt him again.